might kick off in a sec. There's still some people joining us, but we've got lots of exciting things for everyone today. So welcome to everyone to the second IAB webinar. It'll be quite a different one than last week. Last week was very technical, looking at the history of cookies and the impact of third-party cookies going away. Something on a more of a marketing light today. We're releasing brand new research that we've carried out locally on direct brands. So we're going to have an hour session. We've got a lot to get through. The full report won't be available to Tuesday, so you can all have a nice crisp Easter break and eat lots of chocolate and think about the full report next week to consume. And hopefully you're all going to be able to have a little bit of a tune out over Easter. I think everyone is probably at peak webinar and peak video conference time now. So hoping you can all sort of tune out as best you can in your own environments. So today's session, we're going to, as I said, give you a sneak peek at some research on the direct brand economy in Australia. The work follows on from a lot of research that the IAB in the US and UK have carried out over the last few years. And I'd like to give a big thank you to the sponsors who have supported this research project. We've worked with a wonderful research company we've worked with before called Pollinate. You can see hopefully on your screens we've got Howard Parry Husbands, who's the CEO of Pollinate, who's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting today in terms of the research. I'm going to set it up looking at a little bit of the global market and also a tiny bit of research which we've just put out today on the state of the current market. So the world has changed a lot since we commissioned this research, though it's actually strangely more fitting than ever. So the work that we've done on this piece of research is looking at direct brands, which is we're often called direct consumer brands or DTC, and the element of having that direct, authentic relationship with consumers, as well as a very highly e-commerce driven environment, actually makes this research probably more fitting than ever, and all the work around trust that these brands do. And I'll let Howard get into sort of things that define those companies a little bit more through the presentation. So after my intro and then Howard's presentation, we will have about 10 minutes for Q&A. So please get engaged, shoot through your questions. We'll try to get through as many as we can, and any we can't answer, we'll get to afterwards. So please feel free. It's, you know, we were hoping to have this as a physical event and very engaging. We will be following up with a number of podcasts and interviews with the founders from a lot of these direct brands to bring that element to life as well. So over the last few years, I've noticed a really interesting arc in the media when looking at direct brands. There was an initial sort of celebration of every small brand that launched, often with very strange names. And then suddenly that turned, I guess, to a little bit of suspicion on sustainability and viability of these brands. In this research, we've tried to land in a place that celebrates what's great about fast-growing disruptive brands while recognising the challenges for these companies as they mature. Hopefully this presentation will provide value for direct marketers, direct brand marketers to understand consumers in this space, but also for traditional marketers, particularly as many are having to currently rapidly shift to e-commerce, and also for media owners, agencies and ad tech companies who will play an increasingly important role as these companies scale. So let's get into it. Some of you may have seen this diagram. It came out of the IAB US a couple of years ago, and it really gets to the heart of when we're talking about direct brands, what's different. Because you could consider a lot of companies that have any relationship with the consumer as a direct brand. The brands we're focusing on in this research are very much changing the way that they operate. So they've got data at the heart, and it's not such a linear journey to supplying to consumers. They're controlling a lot more of their own supply chain. They're often doing their own marketing. And at the heart of it is really that consumer and data and product piece. And we'll talk a little bit later how these marketers are really looking at the 4 Ps of marketing. So very much driven on promotion, but they're very close, as they have to be at the beginning, to product, price, and distribution. So that diagram gives you a bit of a feel in terms of how, rather than it's starting with a product and ending up with a consumer, both of those at the heart of the journey, and then building the functional elements of driving these amazing brands around their business. As I mentioned, the US has been looking at this space for, I think it's almost 3 years now, and been tracking a lot of the brands in this space. We are not as mature in this market, either in e-commerce or in the direct-to-consumer space. So it's really quite interesting to have a look at the journey that some of these brands have taken. And as I said, not every brand will be sustainable and survive, and that's the same for any market. But the ones that are becoming more resilient, and they're definitely growing their revenue and able to maintain often those margins. And the ones that are in that mature phase have taken about 3 years to achieve profitability, which is pretty amazing feat. This is some research that came out of the US in their last round, talking to the founders of these direct brand companies and what their current KPIs and long-term business goals are. So I think what's changed over the last couple of years as these brands have matured, that profitability is definitely coming up higher. Obviously, that's always a business goal, but in terms of it coming up the chain, not just building scale, not building volume, but actually looking at sustainability and profitability. And then that customer satisfaction is key to all these brands, understanding the customers. But interestingly, and importantly for many on this call, that new customer side of things. So that has a lot of ramifications for many people on the call. So it's making sure these brands are reaching out, attracting new audiences outside their often core base of original customers. Then long-term business goals, obviously this may change as we adjust to what this year looks like, but a lot of the US brands looking at global expansion, going into new categories. Often that's either directly, but it can also be in partnerships with other companies, which is some really interesting relationships building there. And 3, which is another interesting one, some of them looking at opening up brick and mortar stores. Now that may not be in the traditional sense of having a permanent location somewhere. There might be a bit more agility around, dare I say, I know pop-up sounds old, but pop-up stores or temporary installations in different places. As direct brands grow, they are looking at new ways of reaching new audiences. The majority of the brands that we're looking at today have been born on social and search, but are now looking to expand their communications outside those areas. So going into other areas of digital, but also we're seeing, particularly with a lot of brands, going into out of home, into audio, as their marketing budgets increase, some sort of in a broader video sense, in a more broadcast video sense. So some real opportunities for the market there to engage in that. And we've seen a lot of publishers and platforms expand that sort of self-service platform that these brands can take advantage of. So on the flip side, so we've seen the direct-to-consumer brands sort of expanding what they do, how they do, looking at stores. We're also seeing the traditional brands play a bigger role in this space. And it goes in 2 ways. It's either building those direct relationships with consumers with their own products. So we've seen Nike, we've seen a lot of strong brands build their commerce platforms out and that direct communication, and relying less on the middle sort of retail factor. But we're also seeing acquisition in this space. So a lot of larger companies acquiring smaller companies, learning from them, and hopefully sort of managing them in the right way and keeping their brand purpose and data at the heart of those organisations. So again, we're in a strange time economically at the moment, but most big brands are looking at these plays currently. Okay, challenges. There's a few, and it's interesting, and some of them are unique to direct brands or smaller brands growing. A lot are common across the industry. So these are some of the challenges that were brought up in the US research, but also came through really strongly in the local founder research. So as competition increases, we're seeing increasing acquisition costs for many of these brands. As I've already mentioned, finding new audiences, going outside that core base, trying to balance that customer acquisition cost with long-term brand value, and communicating both of those from a comms point of view. Reliance on earned media. So again, to get to new audiences and outside the sort of word of mouth, traditional advocacy space, making sure that paid media is a component there. More competition we've mentioned. Fit for purpose creative. So a lot of these smaller brands, as they've started off, it's been very authentic, real, social and search creative, created by the founders, created by their, often by their customers, that needs to retain. But as these brands start advertising in different environments, there will be different creative needs and different production costs that come along with that. Privacy compliance is a big one. As we said, data is at the heart of these brands. They're going to very much need to know how they're dealing with different geographies, different regulation, and making sure that trusted bond between the brand and the consumer is not only compliant but very transparent. And that's going to be incredibly important for these brands going forward. Post-cookie world measurement. This is one for all of us, but with these brands who are incredibly focused on looking at return of channels, very much understanding that sort of journey from media through to customer, understanding not just that last cookie piece, but the complete measurement piece. And without cookies, obviously, this is tricky. So often they're in a better place than others because they do have consumer data, but understanding the drivers of both the acquisition and the brand equity growth from a post-cookie world is going to be a challenge when often these smaller brands may not be dealing with agencies or consultancies in this way. Choosing the right funding, making sure these brands grow in the right way, that people are investing for the right reasons, a challenge for all businesses that are growing. And finding the right people. So finding staff as they scale up that can bring both the knowledge often of a larger brand, but also still have that mindset of a smaller brand, be willing to muck in, do everything. So finding people who fit, and obviously for a brand that's, you know, often in a growth mode, every hire is an opportunity but a risk and needs to be thought through carefully. E-commerce in Australia, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone, has been, I think it's been a struggle. We've been slower in market than a lot of the other regions. This has been well documented sort of for the last sort of 10 years as we've tried to get that up. Some of that's due to geography, some of it's existing structure in terms of the retail area, but we are seeing that online retail space really outstrip the traditional retail space. And obviously this period will only ramp that up. So who are these direct brands? The ones that we're talking about, that we talked about in this survey locally, you can see the list on screen there. So there's quite a lot of brands that we sort of asked our consumers when we're going through the research, if they've dealt with them, if they're aware of them. Some of them you've probably heard of, others you may not have. As we were compiling this research and looking at the work that was being done by the IAB US and UK, there was definitely a smaller amount of brands than in those other markets. Still a lot, but not as much. Obviously a smaller market, but also I think it goes to our history of e-commerce being a little bit slower in this market. So that means huge opportunity for everyone. As I mentioned, the world's changed. It's been interesting to see, I guess, over the last month, the direct brands, particularly those who are already well positioned with strong brand and strong advocates, take the lead. Many of you might know Who Gives a Crap, the toilet paper brand, who, you know, in the madness of everyone hunting for toilet paper, is definitely seen both customer growth but a lot of awareness to their brand. And finding that way of you know, with their own tone, their special tone that they have, which is very authentic, communicating with people and their consumers as they run out of toilet paper, and making sure that that brand, it's not a disappointment, that brand relationship and communication is there and strong throughout. Slightly off track, but really important to have in the back of our mind with all of this. And you know, when we look at the brands that we're talking about in resilience and making sure that people can continue to invest and spend, the IAB locally carried out a small research piece with advertisers and marketers over the last couple of weeks, getting a read of what their intentions are in terms of digital ad investment. I won't go through all the stats there. Any of you who are on our email newsletter list will get a nice infographic, even prettier than this one, which I hacked together in the email newsletter this afternoon. You know, the big takeout here is it's not a surprise. Everyone is reviewing their activity. There's a bit of withdrawal, but there's also a little bit of a shift from tactical and performance to brand, particularly while a lot of brands may not have product available. There are a lot of, particularly in the direct space, people watching out if we go to stage 4 in terms of lockdown. It doesn't look like we're going there at the moment, but obviously keeping that brand messaging going throughout that period is incredibly important. This is a slide from the US, a similar study on the impact of COVID on ad spend. And I thought this was important to put in there. So following on from, as I just mentioned, in terms of shifting to brand spend, there's a very clear shift in the US for a lot of brands to shift to mission-based or cause-related marketing. And as we go through the brands today, and a lot of these direct brands have started with a very strong purpose and founder-driven purpose, it's a really good opportunity for brands to go back to those messages, and we're seeing a lot of brands in the US do this. And I'm going to hand over to Howard, who's going to take you through the local research. Howard, over to you.
Fabulous. I'll just check you can hear me for sound. All good. Excellent. Thank you very much, Gai. That was excellent. And just on that last note there, that segue, I think there's a lot of really important implications in the data and in the research that you've just shared with us. Thank you, Gai. The last point there about the shift in terms of spend, performance to mission and cause marketing is incredibly congruent with some of the research that we're collating more widely around certainly COVID-19. We've seen lots of indications that brands that are following more purposeful, practical, pragmatic and values-based communications and marketing initiatives are certainly flourishing. And I should note here that that's an underlying shift that was in Deloitte's annual review this year in CMO magazine. So I think that cause and purposeful direction is incredibly important. And that's actually an interesting segue to the DTC work, because obviously a lot of the DTC brands, as we'll come to in a second, are grounded in a lot of these quite fundamental stories and truth. I think the other interesting takeout, which is an interesting context to what we're about to take you through, is that the market conditions, certainly in this COVID-19 world, are moving towards some of the DTC strengths that businesses have. And I think that's an interesting perspective for us all to take on board, whether we're a DTC brand, a traditional brand, or a media brand that delivers to all of those different customers. Now, I'm going to be using the click word here so that Gai can click on and move my charts forward, and that saves us having to swap screens too much. So just quickly, what did we actually do? Well, we did a whole load of research. We did 1,000 interviews, 15-minute surveys with Australians who've spent with the direct brand. And we also did founder interviews with 10 founders, people who are either CEOs and founders or CEOs of DTC brands. So we went from the consumer perspective, but also the founder's story, and tried to work out what congruence there was. Click. So what I'm going to take you through now is simply put, what are direct brands? And does the consumer have a compartment in their head called DTC brands or not? And then what sets direct brands apart from other brands? Who is the direct brand shopper? How do people shop for direct brands? Is it different or does it change? Talking to direct brand consumers, what's the best way to talk to them? How do DTC brands do their marketing and how do they communicate? And this last point here around once they're in, the simple fact that they're ridiculously loyal and the value that that brings to brands. Click. So let's start off with what are direct brands? Well, direct brands are about much more than just selling directly to customers. So I know that sounds a bit trite, but we call them direct brands. And as you'll see going through this research, that label is something that the industry talks about, DTC brands. The consumer simply doesn't have that compartment in their head. Click. Disruptive brands can really be seen through multiple lenses. Obviously, they're disruptive and they're subject matter experts. Well, that's what they are. But how come they exist is they have a strong founder's story, almost universally, and they're very customer centric, and that is a universal truth. And that's how come they've come about, but it also goes into the how they actually operate. They have an incredibly iterative business model. They literally are constantly changing and adapting, and that is data driven. And what you're seeing here then is that the lens, the way you can look at DTC brands is what they are, how they've arrived, and how they actually operate. Click. So at the simplest level, customers, consumers, people that use them see DTC brands as online and cheaper and more convenient. And effectively, when you ask the question like that, that's how people see them. They say, well, there's non-DTC brands and there's DTC brands. And DTC brands operate like this. Now, this seems quite obvious, but trust me, there's much more to come than this just obvious way of categorizing a DTC brand. When you look at the founder's story, and we had the great pleasure of talking to 10 of them, and they were absolutely fabulous people. The founders themselves see themselves as disruptive and new thinkers. But the truth is they're almost pathologically entrepreneurial. Yes, they are disruptive. But as this last point here from Justin at High Smile says, they're the next frontier of business. A lot of the time, the founders have been in other businesses. They've had experience in the digital universe. They've worked elsewhere, but they've always been looking for something new. They've always been looking for the next thing that can be disruptive. They literally think they're at the next and the new frontier of business. And it's actually quite a powerful insight to what DTC brands are. They themselves are not potentially a threat. What they are is a signpost to what the future offers as opportunities for all of us. So there's a real key there in terms of what they are. Now, what sets them apart? So let's move on from what they are to what sets them apart. And there's really three things that set them apart. Click. On the one hand, there's their value alignment. And we're talking here about alignment of values as much as value in terms of cost. The second thing is they're nimble. They have a nimble business model. They're literally built around being agile. And they're more relevant in terms of brands and in terms of congruence with consumer needs. And this is incredibly important. Let's start off looking a bit deep here, next chart, which is universal human values. Now, I won't go into this in detail, but effectively every single human on the planet has the same set of values. We all see them as universal truths, but we all see different values as more important than other ones. So we might hold them all as absolute truths, but certain values are more important. On the left-hand side here, you can see the personal values that are most important in life to DTC shoppers. And you can see at the top is security, unsurprising as well in these days. But then benevolence, self-direction, universalism, and hedonism. Benevolence is other people and caring about others. Self-direction is me, things like creativity, curiosity. Universalism is beauty of nature and equality. And hedonism is curiosity, new, pleasure-seeking, that sort of thing. The right-hand side are the brand values, that are associated with the DTC brands. And you can see here that 4 of the 5 values associated with DTC brands are congruent with 4 of the 5 top values for personal values. And note that security is top for people, and that would make sense, whereas self-direction and achievement are higher for DTC brands. So effectively, they have an incredible alignment of values between DTC brands and how they talk about themselves and how they operate, and the shopper and what the shopper themselves finds important. Click. And if we look deeper than that, the brand and the founder's story also carry weight. Why is that? Well, because we think as humans in stories. We might like to think in the world of media and advertising and marketing research that data actually matters, but it doesn't. Data is actually just a string of evidence. It's told as a story to make sense to us all, which is why, of course, we have the powerful thing called advertising. In reality, the founder's story carries a lot of weight. 56% of people we spoke to said they trust a brand more if they know the story behind the brand. And DTC brands all have clear, strong stories, founder stories. Further to that, click on, we have 58% of our DTC shoppers preferring brands that they know are sustainable. And that's that broad level of sustainability versus 50% for non-direct. So it's not a huge difference, but it is a difference. Likewise, purchasing from brands that have ethical basis to them. Nearly 10% more, it's 9% more, 57 versus 48 D2C shoppers. So they're not rabid greenies, and they're not looking for social justice out of sight. They won't reject brands that aren't, but they tend towards brands that are more ethical, more sustainable. Click. So here's a whole load of data here, but the key thing to look at is the red bars are direct brands and the gray bars are other brands, and the red bars are much higher across all of these statements. A brand I'd be happy to use, a brand that sets the standard for the category, 54% for DTC brands, only 38 for other brands. A brand that is would be there when I need it, so it feels connected to this brand, 45 versus 28. Consistently across the board, direct brands outperform other brands across all these drivers of relevance. So what we see here is that a DTC brand is effectively much more relevant to the consumer on all of those different statements there. And it's worth looking into those statements because pride, partnership, protection, purpose, and then amplification. This is a really good model to look at in terms of driving relevance. Click. If that's too many numbers on one page, don't worry, we've turned it into an index. If you aggregate all of those drivers and you index it to 100, what you see quite clearly is that non-DTC brands on the left-hand side get about 80 out of 100. DTC brands get 120 out of 100. If you rebase that, DTC brands are 50% more relevant than non-DTC brands. So each of those drivers works, but collectively, what we're seeing here is a DTC brand is 50% more relevant than a non-DTC brand. And underneath this is this nimble business model. What's driving this ability to stay relevant to so many consumers? What's driving this ability? And when you talk to these wonderfully eloquent founders and CEOs of these companies, one of the things that comes through over and over again is data, or data, depending on how you say it. And the reality is they've got so much data around what works and what doesn't. And that's the beauty of advertising online. You can see it instantly. That didn't work. They're nimble, they change. And you can see here from Christy Chong, Modibody, we use data really from day one. And you see data and research and gathering consistently. It's woven through how they talk to us. It's absolutely an integral part of the fabric of how DTC brands work. They use data. They use it to take risk. They use it to try new things. They also use it to measure and evaluate very quickly what's going on, change their minds and try something else. They're data driven, but they're impatient and the data has to deliver. They make decisions and they use the data again to change their minds. So they are absolutely a nimble business model and it is absolutely built on data and evidence. Click. So that's how they use data. That's how their models work. That's how they drive the agile business model and create incredible relevance. Let's flip to the other side now. Who is the direct brand shopper? Well, that's the perception. The perception is that the DTC shopper is young and beautiful, unlike me. And in fact, a lot of DTC shoppers are indeed much like that. They are indeed young and beautiful, but many are not necessarily young. Although I'm sure they're all beautiful. Click. In reality, everyone can be a DTC shopper. The direct brand customer is, as Justin says here from High Smile, a core target of 24-year-old females, but 40% of the customer base is male. And likewise, down the next quote there, we don't have one customer profile anymore, 65-year-old women and 20-year-old blokes. So there's a perception, and it's almost a cliche, that it's that young and beautiful, but it simply isn't. It is much more normally distributed across society. It's not a demographic focus, put it that way. If you click over the page, there's some more data there. The direct brand shoppers are not just millennials. They are younger, they are more metro, but they're also older. Look at that stat in the middle, 64% are 40 plus. So they might be skewed slightly younger and skewed more metro, but you know what? Australia's pretty metro skewed as well. So actually, we're looking at quite a broad mass here. We're absolutely looking at something that is not just a small and narrow metropolitan, wealthy and young advertising executives. Click. Okay, so direct brand consumers reflect the general shopper in valuing security and routine, but they're more likely to value fun and curious. Now, this is actually incredibly interesting and important finding. This is almost dichotomous. And when we first saw this data, the team and I were sort of grappling with it going, well, does this actually make sense? What's actually going on here? They value security and routine, but they're fun and they're curious. So they like new and they like what's happening, but they also like the research process and the investigation. So again, we dive more deeply to look at the underlying structural things driving this. Click. Here are the same values that you saw listed earlier, left-hand side shopper, right-hand side DTC brands, and 4 out of 5 are the same. And you can actually map them. This is a map you can download This is the same, human values. And you can see the most important value here is security, 67%. We also have benevolence on the right-hand side, and on the top left is future direction. Now, you can see in self-direction, you can see things like choosing my own goals, creativity, curiosity, freedom. So that's the desire for new. And there's hedonism as well, and stimulation just next to that. So that top left quadrant is the new stuff, if you like. Whereas the right-hand side stuff and the bottom stuff, they're more security and aligning with other people and looking for more of those, what we call intrinsic values. Click. What we see here, if you stack some of these, is that the direct shoppers are more likely to value fun and curious. There's hedonism and stimulation pulled out there. So we see that direct brand shoppers and non-direct brand shoppers, they've actually got quite similar values. As we saw earlier, they're not hugely different, DTC shoppers to non-DTC shoppers, but a DTC shopper over-indexes on this hedonism and stimulation, this fun and curiosity. Click. But where it gets interesting is they're not innovators in terms of truly out on the bleeding edge, because they're not new junkies. They're not just looking for anything new. They're not going to turn up at the opening of an envelope type of event. They are not, as we say, those new junkies. They're definitely early adopters. And one of the clues here is they're actually excited by trying new brands, but they're not whimsical. They actually enjoy the research process. They do actually spend time looking into, investigating and researching brands. They're effectively not impulsive or impetuous. Click. So they're more adventurous when it comes to trying new brands, but they also take their time actually looking out and conducting research. So you can see here across the board, they're excited by the new, but they're also quite considered. Click. If you map their behavior onto the simple adoption curve, they're pretty broadly onto the left. But you'll notice here that they're not really in the innovator, the true bleeding edge, and they're certainly not in the late majority or the laggards. What they seem to do is they seem to have a role helping brands or new ideas, certainly DTC brands, to cross the chasm, to go from the innovator early adopter into the early majority and then uptaken by the mainstream. And of course, so many new products and ideas die in that chasm. They don't manage to cross from innovators and early adopters into the majority. And this appears to be the role that DTC shoppers play for DTC brands. Click. And if we explore that a bit more, direct brand shoppers are willing advocates, but interestingly, they don't see themselves as influencers in much the same way as they don't see themselves, or they're not new junkies in their behavior, and they are considered and they enjoy the research process. At the same time, they're advocates, but they don't see themselves as influencers. Let's have a look at this some more. So direct brand shoppers are more willing brand advocates, as it says here on the left. 62% of them say, if there's a brand I love, I tend to tell everyone about it. That's pretty high. So the majority of DTC shoppers will advocate a brand. That is to say, they're personally going to talk about it without being prompted. That's only 48% for non-direct brand shoppers. Not a lot, but a significantly bigger amount. 23% of DTC shoppers say that people often come to them effectively for advice, versus 16%. Again, higher, not a lot higher, but they're more likely to be trusted advisors. So we see across the board, a DTC shopper is more likely to be an advocate, to spontaneously tell people about brands that they love, and they're more likely to be someone that people go to for advice. Click. And DTC brand CEOs and founders know this. We hear this again, as well as data and the importance of evidence and data-based decision-making to stay nimble and agile. The other thing we see here is the customer as a fierce advocate. And the wonderful quote here, our customers can be fierce advocates, and sometimes the team don't even have time to apply, and the Facebook comments are already being pitched in. These people are spontaneously choosing to advocate for the brands they absolutely love. So DTC founders know the value of turning passionate and loyal shoppers into a channel in its own right. So we've got this idea now that there's a disruptive model built on data and evidence, and there's also incredible need to align your values with your customers. And what that does now is it creates a lot of support, it creates a lot of loyalty and advocacy. What we now need to understand, well, how do Australians actually shop for direct brands? How do they go through the process of becoming a DTC shopper or one of those advocates? Well, there's really some steps to it. And the steps are really interesting because the drivers of behavior at each point change. So step one, discovery. How do they find out about the DTC brand? Step two, purchase. How do they first engage and buy? And step three, how do they repeat buy and fall in love with the DTC brand? And you can see underneath, they're different drivers. You discover through word of mouth or online search. And you purchase because of, well, low cost and convenience. It's kind of like a hygiene factor. Well, why wouldn't you? It's cheaper and better. Comes to me. And then the motivation factors kick in. It's unique. It's uniquely better. And it's got these great reviews. And it's really good quality. And you discover all these things you like about it. So we go from online search and word of mouth and effectively recommendations going on there through reasons why you wouldn't, hygiene factors, well, you might as well give it a go, to reasons why you would, motivation. And then you fall in love. Then you move beyond costs and you start talking about the great product and it's aligned with my personal values. You're effectively now internalizing the brand attributes, both emotional and rational, into your own sense of self in terms of aligning those values. Click. So there's breaking down the discovery stage, searching online and word of mouth. That makes up fully 60% of what people said was how they first heard about it. Searching online and word of mouth. And my suggestion would be those two things probably go together, but we can't prove that with the data. But you can clearly see those two channels are incredibly important. And then Instagram, Facebook, but look at that then, mentioned on TV, in-store, and so on. So there's still a swathe, but it's search and social is how they discover. Click. And then it's price. That's what gets shoppers over the line. Price suited me, section of quality, ease of buying, uniqueness, brand experience, customer service. But it's pretty much conversion at this point to try and buy is driven by price. But when you stack this all up on the next chart, it's interesting to see the different bands, if you like, of drivers. Ease of choice, uniqueness, quality, and reviews. Well, they drive the attraction to direct brands. In fact, if you look at this question, what attracted you? The top two are the hygiene factors. Value for money, quick and easy delivery and returns. That's pretty much the definition of a DTC brand in many respects. And then what are the drivers now? What attracted you? The next four things. Choosing which product to buy was very simple. If you think about it, that's axiomatic. Most DTC brands don't sell 173 different products and lines. They generally sell a few things that they do very differently. So choosing the product's pretty straightforward. It's a unique product. I couldn't buy it anywhere else. Generally speaking, it's a disruptive business model. It's the only way you can get this. It usually looks at an existing lack of, if you like, creativity or choice in the market and comes up with a point of difference. The brand of product had great reviews. Generally speaking, we see that. It's surrounded by people who absolutely love it and talk about it and are passionate. And it has superior craftsmanship and manufacturing quality. Boom. Now we're getting to the point where we're starting to cross over into an actual product or service delivery intrinsic point of difference. Underneath this now are all the proof points. Australian owned, innovative, whatever it might be. So when shoppers have bought the brand, they've found out about it early from searching and social, they've engaged with it and now understand it. Why do they fall in love? Great product and quality. They've now flipped over and taken over from cheap price and convenience. And you can see uniqueness is way down the line. Loyalty and love is this transition that's gone on. Okay. So you can see how, as they go through the decision corridor, their needs and the drivers of desire, if you like, change all the way through and adapt. And that leads to this, click, a very high retention rate. We have some amazing long-term customers. It's so exciting. We still recognize their names from when we first started. So there's an incredibly high retention rate. This actually chimes with something that Gai said earlier around DTC brands also maturing in terms of they move from social and digital to bricks and mortar. And we see here as well that the drivers for the consumer also change as they go through their relationship with DTC brands. And the reason I wanted to make that parallel was how there's such an evolution going on in DTC brands. Well, that's also mirrored by the evolution with the shopper. The shopper will try them, they'll talk about them, will get familiar with them, then they'll advocate them. Okay, and what we're seeing here is there's a very high retention rate driven by the fact that DTC brands deliver at various different levels of need, the more that the customer engages with them. So how do DTC brands actually talk? What's their marketing and communications and how do they actually work? Well, the first thing is that marketing is a significant part of their actual expenditure. Now, this quote's taken a little bit out of context, but the bottom line is people are often saying to DTC brand founders and CEOs, well, you haven't got all the overhead, you haven't got all that other resources and stuff and blah. But the response from DTC brands is, but I've got marketing costs. In fact, marketing is a huge amount of expenditure for DTC brands, and it's incredibly important. So don't underestimate how crucial marketing, media, channel, and all of that communication strategy is to DTC brands. It is absolutely front and center of pulling it all together. And one of the key points here, click, is that direct brand marketers are channel agnostic. That whole world of media neutral that was such a big thing 15 years ago hasn't gone away. It's absolutely front and central to DTC brands. They are literally channel agnostic. Click. If you look at where shoppers see ads for direct brands, obviously there's the ones at the top that we'd expect, Facebook, Instagram, Google, and so on. But very quickly you see in that tail that shoppers expect to see direct ads, brands rather, in a range of media. Yes, of course, you've got the most recalled place at the top. They're also the biggest. But after that, you've also got free-to-air commercial television, online news, magazines, billboards, YouTube, in fact, just about everything. Click. What DTC brand marketers want is return on investment. And they want flexibility in their media buying. There's a great quote here. We used to spend a lot of our budget on digital, but that's actually rolled back now. This next point down, we don't lock in anything further than a quarter ahead. We know it means we have to pay a price premium, but we need to maintain flexibility. They'll pay for flexibility. We're starting to max out with our reach on socials. We're having to look at other ways in. It's a common thing we heard over and over again, talking to the CEOs and the founders, is we've got pretty good at what we've got. We know what our returns on investment are from the digital channels we use. What we really need to do now is to move further on and recognize that we need to move slightly outside of our core. They are adapting, and they will be looking for return on investment and data and evidence for that. And they will insist upon a degree of flexibility around their media buying in order to deliver to that. Click. One thing that they recognize fundamentally as well is that once they're in, they're loyal, they're locked in to direct brands. And this is incredibly important for DTC brands. Click. The positive experience with direct brands is driving a reinforcing or positive loop. So at Pollinate, we use a lot of systems thinking, and we always look for reinforcing loops because that creates habit. It's also a good indication of growth, business growth, changing societal behavior, changing consumer behavior, or underlying change in values. What you have here is a whole load of statements on the left-hand side. I'm very open to buying brands that aren't well known, for instance, or I get excited about trying new brands, or purchasing from ethical brands, important, whatever they might be. The columns on the right-hand side, I've bought from a direct brand once, 2 or 3 times, 4+ times. And pretty much every single number here gets bigger the more DTC brands someone buys. So the more a shopper buys a DTC brand, the stronger their mindset and openness comes to buying more DTC brands, and that reinforces its loop. So effectively, the drivers of buying DTC brands increase the more DTC brands you buy. What we have here is a positive feedback loop. In systems thinking, this means it will grow. This means as long as the DTC brands maintain this consistency in terms of their values alignment, in terms of their business model, they will continue to grow advocacy, and they will continue to drive more and more DTC brands. Effectively, the DTC brand ecosystem increases. The repertoire of brands that I'm happy to try, DTC brands, grows the more I buy. Click. And then this stacks up slightly further again in terms of loyalty. This is an interesting chart because the red there is 2 in 5 people, 38%, only buy my favorite DTC brand. They wouldn't buy who gives a crap toilet roll from anywhere else anymore. Okay, that's fine. Interestingly, 27% also buy others, but rarely. They might have run out, lost the delivery, someone stole their box, whatever it might be. But they would pretty much prefer to buy their favorite brand. You could arguably put those two together and say that fully 2/3 of people are actually loyal, because the last one, by the way, is repertoire. They'll still buy DTC brands and they'll still buy other brands, but they're within a repertoire. Effectively, there's a certain amount of loyalty you get full stop with the DTC brand shopper, and there's a lot of passionate loyalty. So this all really sums up, by way of closing and handing back to Gai, in a very, very simple model that I've kind of tried to step through here, which is the 3 key elements that make up a DTC brand. It's a disruptive model, but it's so much more than a disruptive model, because also, number 2, it's a values alignment. And the values alignment creates a sense of hope and expectation from consumers that by supporting this brand or choosing this brand, not another one, I'm also supporting and reinforcing the things that I hold to be more important, more sustainable, more ethical, not one of the big bad guys, whatever it might be. Those alignments come in. It's Australian grown, whatever the proof points might be. Where do I get those proof points from? Number 3, it's a better product. There it all is, stacked up in there, all the proof points. If you have got a Who Gives a Crap toilet roll, it's amazing to look at. The wrapping itself, the inside of the roll itself, it's FSC, it donates money. There's a whole load of proof points in there, a bucket of them. So whichever motivation you have, whether it's a social justice or an environmental thing or just something playful, it's all there. Now, if you look at the overlaps here, you can start to see exactly what we heard in the research. The overlap between 1 and 2, customer first, customer centricity. The reason that DTC brands are so incredibly media neutral is they'll go wherever the customer is. They put the customer first. That means they're in partnership with me. They're going where I'm expecting to see them. They're doing what I want them to do. The overlap between 2 and 3, it's good for me. There's no guilt in this. Why wouldn't I buy this? Everything about this reinforces my sense of purpose, my morals, my ethics, those drivers that we saw that are so important once I start building a relationship with them. And if I want any further proof, the founder's story and all the reviews I'm reading. Where this brand came from is still manifestly important. My God, the founder is still the CEO just about all the time. And at the same time, all these reviews I'm reading from other people, that all collapses into driving that loyalty, which itself perpetuates advocacy. So this model, I think, is really important in summary, because the market conditions at the moment appear to be moving to favor a DTC model. But as DTC brands grow, what we're seeing is manifestly DTC brands move outside of a DTC model and embrace more and more a traditional model. Whether it is, as Gai put earlier up in one of her charts, looking at more traditional media or even bricks and mortar, or as we see in our research here, constantly trying new things and recognizing that traditional digital marketing channels are increasingly exhausted and they have to look outside of that. So on that point, I shall hand back to Gai. Thank you very much for listening to me. It's been a delight working with the IAB, and I think Gai has some fabulous implications.
Thanks, Howard. That was awesome. And it's quite exciting. I almost want to sort of run off and start a toilet paper company or something myself at the moment. So I have to think of something that's still open. I'm going to try and wrap up some of the lessons for the different audiences out of this research. And then we've got quite a few questions coming through, so we'll have a bit of chat at the end, particularly, I guess, in the light of what's happening at the moment. So I guess, how can media owners and agencies help direct brands reach their next phase of growth? And as I said, a lot of these brands haven't used agencies in the past, but as they start using new media channels, as they start just getting busier or more product lines, they are starting to look at what is the value of outsourcing and partnering with some different providers. So if particularly, I guess, from the media owner point of view, really showing ways that the audiences on these media channels can interact with their direct brands. So they're used to almost content marketing from a social and particularly a social point of view. Are there branded content opportunities? How can you keep that conversation going? So think about the products in your mix that talk to that. But the real value you add to the direct brands in this area is giving them access to new customers, to new people who are not across their brand. Support them in terms of the data-driven approach to marketing. So they will think about first-party data. What first-party data options have you got to help them match, drive, either, talk to their existing customers, but again, more importantly, to new customers. Help them with providing tools in terms of the test and learn approach. This is just natural to direct brand founders. They're testing and learning all parts of their business, including marketing. How can your products be agile enough to allow them to do this? We saw one of the quotes earlier in terms, and it probably gives every salesperson on the call nightmares, but, very late booking, very, agile approach to messages and booking their media. So support will be needed there. And then I guess guidance in terms of campaign planning, particularly cross-media measurement. We talked about cookie challenges before, and creative development. And some of this creative development may be new for some of these brands who may not have been in other media areas before. And then I guess just the mindset, and that's a word that gets thrown around, but really thinking about that agile, being able to move quickly, and having that honest conversation with consumers. I think that is also understanding those brand founders and their purpose, and fitting that in with your own environments. Okay, so what can direct brand founders do in terms of driving long-term sustainability? So continue to be data informed, but be mindful of gaps in the data. And with this, I don't necessarily mean, as we were talking about data compliance before, but things like brand equity, share of voice. A lot of the data sets will be very focused on current customers and keeping them happy, which absolutely has to remain. But once you're reaching outside that market and looking for long-term growth, understanding those brand metrics is incredibly important. It can be hard, it can be more expensive, but particularly as we've seen in research time and time again, particularly in a recession or tough times, anyone who invests in brand comes out incredibly stronger. And as all of these categories become more crowded, and I think we're seeing in the US, I think there's 250 mattress companies, direct DTC mattress companies at the moment. Those with a strong brand will come out stronger. So anyone who deals with the US market will immediately think of Casper, probably the largest, the first, but also spent more on brand than the 249 other brands that are out there. Combining brand and performance in campaigns, getting that balance right, starting to prioritise lifetime value and getting a better understanding of that rather than just cost per acquisition. Don't just rely on this word of mouth and advocacy piece. Again, as Howard's mentioned, brand loyal people, incredibly strong, will retain loyalty. But as you need to expand the customer base and the audience, really needed to reach outside that core group. Continue to be customer centric. I think these brands can teach us all a lesson in that, and media neutral where possible. And this is probably going to sound a little bit self-serving, and I guess we need to get the tone right at the moment, but the market isn't great at the moment. So there are opportunities for brands to, with the right way and the right messages, to be in quite premium environments, which when we're talking about building brand, having that almost partnership with some bigger brands can help grow your brand and give that halo effect. So I just think about options that are available now that, may not always be available. And then, exploring that mix of channels and media mix to broaden audiences. We've seen any of you who are across the research that we did with Kantar last year, and it's, coming through with analytics partners. Rule of thumb, within reason, is more channels the better in terms of return, reaching people in different areas that will grow brand trust, brand equity, and effectiveness as well. So what can traditional brands do to adapt to the direct brand model? I think I've had more conversations on logistics and distribution than I ever have in my life as a sort of marketing person in the last few weeks, as everyone tries to shift to understand how to actually get their product to customers. Direct brands have been doing this for a long time. Even if they outsource some of this, they're very close to that distribution area. So understanding that. Returning to a clear brand purpose. So, a lot of larger brands, they do have a purpose built within their product, within their offering, but really going back to the heart of that and what it means for your business and consumers and communicating that very clearly. We're seeing, I think, particularly Coles and Woolies do a great job at the moment. They're obviously not having to spend a lot in terms of promotion and performance side of things, but going back to what do they stand for in the community, how do they support the community, how do they support the staff, and I think that's a really powerful message at the moment. And again, coming out the other side of this, which we will, that will hold them in good stead. Positioning the brand as a master of category. So, this is where traditional brands actually have an opportunity to, if they are already well known in a category, as they shift, hold on to that share of voice as they transition and start dealing directly with consumers. And then the test and learn approach. And I can't sort of emphasize this enough, making sure this is coming through in the marketing side of things. Test and learn, experimental design for marketing, really just being able to drill into what's working and aligning the data, which a lot of the larger brands may not have had a direct relationship with consumers. Building that with a data strategy as well. So lots of opportunities for everyone there to really grow and learn from each other. It's been really interesting as I've gone through this work, and again, you know, this time in our lives, it being sort of quite different at the moment. And as I said, the direct brands are incredibly, they're almost like traditional marketers when I look at their strengths. So, you know, harking back to the 4Ps, they are across all four. So pricing in particular, you know, product, they've normally built the product or been very close to the build, distribution, so the place element of the Ps, and then from a promotional point of view, they've been very strong in terms of that direct communication. But on the flip side, when I look at the traditional brands, who are incredibly strong brand marketers, and have a lot of lessons for so I guess the direct to consumer area, to how that brand equity, that share of voice, that sort of ongoing area. So again, both sides learning from each other, to build stronger businesses throughout. And I think if we can all focus on all those four areas, and I think probably, and you know, and anyone who knows me, I hate giving Professor Ritson too much glory, but you know, he has been talking a lot about at the moment, a lot of marketers not being close to those other 3Ps, being very promotion driven, ad driven, comms driven. And I think this is an opportunity where we all have to get close to the other 3Ps, while there are challenges in supply chains, while there are challenges in a lot of areas of getting products to people. So it's a good opportunity for marketers who may not have that classic sort of training in marketing to get close to those other 3Ps. So that is our presentation today. As I said, the whole deck, there is more, will be up on the website on Tuesday for you to all share and read.